When I was a restoration contractor and I would document a loss, there would always be somebody who wanted to try to pick apart what I was producing or my professional opinion. The second that I put this shirt on and stepped into this role, not to say nobody's ever questioned it, but it's exceedingly rare. Which is I'm happy for, but it's also super annoying. Like, the knowledge base didn't change.
Yeah.
The accuracy of the opinion didn't change.
Yeah.
I just changed where I was standing slightly.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I'm a subject matter expert.
Okay, so first tell me what Building Investigation Services does and who your customer base is.
So we are primarily a large loss documentation company. The large majority of our work is in the moisture mapping space, the initial moisture mapping on losses that are typically larger than, I would say, 20,000 square feet, although we do occasionally do smaller ones depending on the area. The majority of our work is the initial mapping, interfacing with the consultant to justify the scope of work that the contractor is doing. And then we usually phase out. We may stay on the project longer depending on the client. We have some clients that we monitor all the way through. So that way it's not them saying this area is dry, we can pull equipment now. There's a third party that's saying, no, it's still wet, you still need to leave that. And it helps justify those, equipment days once you get above 5 to 7 days. We also have started to offer more and more large loss environmental services, whether it be asbestos, lead, mold, CIH endorsed protocols, things like that. That all depends on, the state, whether there's licensing in place, things like that. But generally, we can help with most of those issues in most places.
The paperwork packet that you sent over as a template is very impressive.
Thank you.
What you guys provide to back up the work that's being done by contractors.
Yeah, we have our own method that we've devised. I actually had a contractor out of Seattle ask if we could do Mika the other day. And, I had to tell him, unfortunately, we predominantly use our way of doing things because it's what we've found we're able to scale on large losses. Most of your softwares, they start to break down, in that 10 to 20,000 square feet range. Your input just becomes excessive. The software may not be able to handle it itself. You may not be able to connect to that software from within the structure that you're in. I remember there was one project where they were trying to use a software and it was a school building. So everything was cinder block, and they would have to leave the building to try to input the information into the software. And it was a 200,000 square foot loss. So there was no world in which they were going to be able to keep up with their documentation.
Totally.
So ours is meant to be low tech enough that it can be done, in hurricane zones, places like that, where you don't have a lot of connection, while still having all the data necessary for, restoration contractors, demolition subs, adjusters, consultants, without being too much to where you lose people just with information overload. And with our system, we know that we can, defend it in a court if we had to. Fortunately, we've never been put in that position. We're very proactive with our losses. We know very early on if there's going to be an issue, and we try to address that as fast as we can. Whether it means suggesting a scope change to the contractor or figuring out what the issue is with the consultant, why they don't agree with the scope or something like that. But our documentation, every single reading is documented by area. Every single thermal image is documented by area. We pride ourselves in being able to find any reading at any point in the building within 5 minutes. because how we organize our things. And it's been years of practice to get it to the point that we have. And
Mhm.
every year we go through and do revisions to our maps, to our documentation process. We determine if we need to add more information. And the part that's actually the most useful in general, like the maps are great, everyone loves maps. But we end up becoming a centralized source of information about that project. So
Mhm.
we produce triage lists and have every single space within the building delineated, and then we track the status of those spaces, whether it be mapping or no access, or if testing's involved, what spaces have been tested. And then we provide that to all the materially interested parties that the customer wants. Sometimes they don't want the carrier to see it, because they want it to remain a work product, not necessarily be something that's just free for everyone to look at. But it ends up being a centralized source of information where all the parties can work off of that. All the spaces are defined. We link all the maps directly to that sheet. So you can literally go look, for Office 306B, it's right there. You click it, you have the map, you're done.
Yeah.
Um, so we, on large projects where there's multiple different contractors, PAs, engineers, cause and origin, all these different groups, we have actually found a lot of success with them using our triage system, since we're typically some of the first in, and everyone using that kind of as the basis uh, of all the documentation for the property. And it tends
Yeah.
to work pretty well.
Yeah, that sounds super handy to have one source that's sort of the official source for all that info. Tell me a little bit about your background and how you got involved in water restoration. And I mean, I met you because I met your dad. I had the privilege of sitting with your dad when I was first starting
Oh
my
yeah,
water restoration company. He was sitting next to me at a convention I was at. So I feel
I,
like
I
I know
forgot that
you for
I
forever.
forgot that you were at that one. I was at the one in Florida at the same time.
Oh yeah, yeah, exactly right. So how did
um,
you get started? I know you'd already been starting long before I did.
Yeah, I'm second generation. My family has always been in the insurance industry. My grandfather was an insurance agent out of Houston doing builder's risk policies.
Oh wow.
My father was an insurance adjuster underneath Pilot and a couple others for a number of years. Then eventually we moved to Indiana on a State Farm assignment through Pilot, and then we settled down here. He took a desk adjuster job for State Farm, jumped over to American Family at some point, and then decided to get into the restoration side of it.
Yeah.
So I started going out on fire and water jobs since I was 13 years old, and started as a gopher. As soon as I was old enough to have my driver's license, I was a gopher. Even before that, I was, cleaning and organizing tool rooms and restocking vans because we were full service. So, the reconstruction and remodeling portions of our business were probably about 2/3 of the total most of the time. So we were also we were a moderate sized general contractor in the area at that point. And then over the years, I've worked in every single position in a full service restoration company outside of, like I don't finish drywall and I don't actually wire. I can design a wire scope, but I will not wire anything.
Hmm.
But over the years, went from one position to the next. I was an estimator for a number of years, bookkeeper for a while, all the way until years later I was the vice president, and um, did that for a number of years. And then the day to day dealing with clients and adjusters, and especially how aggressive everything started to get, where everyone was accusing you of overcharging or various billing issues. Being having been told for a decade that we were screwing people over, we weren't doing things right, even though I knew that we were doing things right.
Hmm.
It got to me, and I decided I needed a change, because the anger towards um, just all the crap was getting to be pretty intense. At that point in time, we had the opportunity to work in North Carolina under an environmental company called SRP Environmental. They are still pretty big, but they've worked a lot of large losses, and worked with them for uh, that storm in North Carolina. Went off and did some other things for a couple other storms, but from that point on, mostly played around large loss in one form or the other, whether it was consulting, moisture mapping, testing, things like that.
I know that
And
I've seen
then,
over the years you've gotten certification after certification. Um,
yeah, I think I actually one of my territory managers asked me the other day what the list was, and I actually counted it up, and it was 26 separate like classes, certifications, things like that. And even I was a little surprised by that. Um, I have a very wide interest in the industry. Surprisingly, I actually am not a triple masters with the IICRC because I've just never gotten around to doing the carpet classes.
yeah, yeah,
But hey, if it was water, fire, or mold, I got those ones pretty early on. But you have to have the carpet and the upholstery and color
right,
repair in order to get your masters, and I just never got around to that. But yeah,
right.
I'm certified in appraisal. I'm certified in low slope roofs and residential roofs through Hague. I mean, just a little bit of everything. I'm licensed in 4 different states for lead or asbestos,
hmm
various things like that. So when it comes to insurance claims, from one point or the other, I've seen just about everything. I mean, we did a fentanyl assessment the other day for a restoration contractor in an apartment complex. That
Yeah,
particular one was a new one for me. But
that's probably a growing segment of the market too,
yeah,
surprisingly.
yeah. At least for Indiana, they actually roped fentanyl. It used to just be a meth lab inspector. Indiana had one of the harder licenses in that area because we were always in the top 3 states for meth consumption.
hmm
So they had it as just a meth inspector license. And then over the years, they actually added fentanyl and a couple other things into it. And now it's a clandestine lab inspector class. And the fentanyl portion of it has started to supersede the meth portion, because a lot of meth production's actually been moved to south of the border. So we don't get nearly the meth labs. Meth usage is still high, but we don't see the labs at the same rate that we used to.
Yeah. Well, I guess that's a good thing, kind of.
Less contaminated houses. Doesn't
Yeah,
really help on the human front, but
yeah, yeah. What inspired you to start? Well, I mean, it sounds like you needed to make a change, and you're very well educated in this industry. Um,
it, yeah, it was. I have found over the years that the smaller the job, the more hassle that tends to result from that. That $150, basement pump out in the middle of a high volume event
mhm,
will sometimes give you more trouble than $100,000 loss. And
mhm,
that's not always completely true. Obviously, large losses have their own issues, but I found large loss to be much more interesting,
mhm,
and it kept my attention to a greater degree.
mhm.
And the quality of people that are typically involved is higher on average.
Their
You're
knowledge.
not dealing with a desk adjuster who's never looked at an insurance claim before telling you how you should invoice. You're typically dealing with veteran adjusters, consultants, people like that. May
Mhm,
not make it easier because they may have, uninformed ideas about how certain things are supposed to work,
mhm,
but at least your conversations will typically be of a higher caliber.
mhm. Yeah, more knowledgeable. Yeah, that makes good sense. Um, what strategies do you recommend for water restoration businesses to stay competitive?
So everything is, I foresee things changing fairly quickly, especially with the introduction of AI. I worked with a company for a little bit that was a big Sedgwick service
Mhm,
provider. And as someone who had been predominantly an independent company, staunchly anti TPA,
mhm,
we had been on the code blue for like like a week. And State Farm's PSP program years ago, and that was the most that we ever did with that.
Mhm.
And then getting to peek behind the curtain a little bit and see where the insurance industry was trying to move things and how streamlined their process was. Not that it was necessarily easier or better. It made me realize that there is a growing gulf between the way the insurance companies are pushing to handle these claims and the way that us as contractors are used to handling them.
Mhm.
So while I don't think that I think that programs are a race to the bottom. And,
Mhm.
we've seen that over the last, 5 or so years. It used to be, oh, well, Liberty Mutual gave, State Farm 5% off, or I mean, Pure Clean gave Liberty Mutual 5% off equipment or something like that. And that was, all you had to do. And
Mhm.
now you're seeing the list of requirements and the profit margins on multiple things in multiple areas just keep getting, eaten away. However, the way that they process claims in those spaces is much quicker. Approvals are much faster, and the claims process typically moves at a better speed and more concisely. And contractors who remain on the outside, there's going to start to be a growing difference between, it's kind of similar to, a pizza company that has an app versus a pizza company that you got to call and then be put on hold for X amount of time and their menu's not online. So you're not quite sure what they're even offering.
Yeah.
We'll start to see the gulf between the companies that are tech savvy or have a more clear cut line of communication with the carrier or the TPA, and those who choose to do things the old way.
Mhm.
For our company, for instance, we use a software called Jobber, and it has like text confirmations to let people know who's going to be there, when they're going to be there, things like that. Even though we're not really in the insurance space. Our work may revolve around it, but we don't really live and die by Xactimate, for instance. But we're always looking at ways to increase the customer experience. From our Google page, people can schedule appointments with our techs without any
Mhm.
human involvement from our side. Um, so when I look at things like that, I try to build it out the way that I would want to use it. And I'm an introvert who doesn't like to pick up the phone these days. So anything that I can go beginning to end without any interaction from someone else, that's the way I like it. So, but we've seen a lot of jobs that we would have missed out on if we hadn't had these kinds of things in place. So
Mhm.
people who just keep relying on the same avenues of getting work, the same processes, and ignore the technological side of the industry, will see less and less market share over time. And they'll lose it to those who really embrace it and try to improve their company with it, especially as we see AI handles more claims and things like that.
Yeah. Are there any other technologies that you see as up and coming or that you're running across?
So from a operation side, equipment tracking, things like that, it'll be interesting once the data from Matterport will start to, or DocuSketch or anything like that, once that data starts to sync up with equipment tracking and things like that, there's a couple people who are doing new things that may greatly decrease the amount of entry work, the amount of, figuring it out for yourself. The Core Logic, they have a portion of their estimating software that they're super proud of that's supposed to estimate water damages very accurately. Now, we wouldn't consider it accurate from our point of view, but based on the data that they process, they believe that their algorithm will predict the cost of a water loss pretty closely for setting reserves and things like that.
Mhm.
But as we see more algorithmic functions and AI and see those two start to marry, you're going to start to have clients who receive a check in the mail without any human interaction just off the cuff in hopes that they'll settle for that amount just based off of information that they enter into an online portal and no humans have touched it. Like that's, and then having to jump through AI customer service in order to actually even talk to an adjuster. That's more than likely where we're going to end up. Now there's legal ramifications and other things like that between where we are now and that, but where there's money, there's a way, and likely they'll change their policies in order to encompass the rise of AI.
Yeah. Yeah. We recently had an auto claim that we had to make, and it was very similar to that. We got a check very fast, and they just were hoping that that would be good enough. And it may
Yeah,
or may not be. We'll end up finding out. But yeah,
yeah,
I think that getting the money quickly makes a lot of their problems go away. And then, but I think if we end up needing to supplement or whatever, it's going to be quite a process to actually get through to talk to somebody. I think you're exactly right. Having
yeah.
just gone through that
Well, we
personally.
see that in the unadulterated free market now,
Hmm.
with companies decreasing the size of their customer service staff
Hmm.
and making it increasingly hard to get past the AI customer service in order to get a hold of a real person. I
Hmm.
don't remember what site. I think it was Thumbtack. I
Mm.
needed to change something on Thumbtack where they didn't give you the functionality to change it yourself, and I had to jump through like 8 different windows just to get to the chat function, and then like 3 separate elements of the AI just to try to get somebody on the line.
Hmm.
And I'm fairly certain that we'll be looking at similar experiences once we get to that point.
Yeah. I've been through similar recently as well. That I think that seems exactly right. Um, what strategies do you suggest for building meaningful relationships within the industry, the restoration industry?
So one of the things that I see that successful people do, because we're around a lot of large loss people. Some of them get one-off projects, and some of them get return clients. Um, Not being too full of yourself and not being too over reliant on your own opinion
Hmm.
can go a long way, because especially if you hope to or do operate in the large loss arena, the chance that you will come across these people more than once is pretty high.
Yeah, I think
And
I will.
what the taste you leave in their mouth on that first job is how they're probably going to treat you that from that point moving forwards.
Hmm.
um we have some clients that have not listened to our advice, and they've had to deal with the outcome of that. And then you have others that have, and we treat all of them the same. We try not to you know if a client has no large loss experience, we try to treat them the exact same as somebody who's been doing large loss for 20 years. And the same goes for carriers and consultants and PAs and any people like that on a project. You don't know who's on that project. You don't know what their CV looks like. It may be better and thicker than yours.
Yeah.
And coming in guns blazing, even if the adjuster or the consultant or the engineer or someone like that is wrong,
Hmm.
coming in there to defend yourself, at a 11 out of 10 will a lot of times in the long run do you more harm than it will do you good in that situation.
Hmm.
We have multiple consultants and PAs and various parties that are happy to see us if we get called onto a job that they're already on.
Hmm.
We try not to make enemies. Even one of our competitors on the opposite side, on the carrier side, is EFI Global. They're a Sedgwick company
Hmm.
that performs a lot of the same services, and the carriers will typically call them out. And I wrote a protocol on a 4-story sprinkler line failure that turned into a mold project. And then, of course, the carrier sent EFI Global, and worked with them for an entire day, even had lunch with them, even though we did not agree on everything that was going on that project. We were still able to resolve everything that we needed to resolve, and the claim got closed and paid. And no, someone could have gotten really annoyed in one direction or the other.
Mhm.
There's lots of people that be annoyed that anyone was coming to possibly contest their work product at all.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of restoration contractors, usually the greener ones, that end up with that mentality. But
Mhm.
typically keeping that, cooler persona and being relaxed with the situation until the situation really necessitates it, uh, typically improves your relationship building on these jobs.
Yeah, absolutely. And even for the small guys, the adjusters that they end up arguing with, you may end up with that adjuster again.
Yeah.
You wanna try to be a good human through the process, because
Yeah, even if they really don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
I had a conversation with someone the other day, and they were advocating, kind of beating someone over the head. And it's like, in my experience, that typically doesn't work super well. You put someone
Mhm.
else in a defensive position, and no educating is going on.
Yeah,
If you take a cool and calm approach to it, the chance that you're going to be able to educate them, you won't fix everything that's incorrect in their knowledge base or way of thinking, but the chance that you'll be able to bring them closer to your own is much higher if you don't start, right out of the gate with a very aggressive stance.
totally. And then lastly, how do you encourage and facilitate collaboration between different entities within our industry?
So for us personally, we like to be that central element on a large loss, specifically within this space. It's our work product that is typically the central item between a public adjuster, carrier, consultant, contractor, subcontractors, even depending on the situation. So by creating a common point of reference for everybody on that loss,
Mhm.
everyone's using the same language, the same areas. The amount of times that I've seen different parties on a claim do their own matter ports, do their own write ups, and oh, this one guy came up to 160,000 square feet. This other guy came up to 220,000 square feet. When parties are kind of all working on their own work process
Mhm.
in parallel,
Yeah.
not really in unison, that will complicate the claim. Nobody's on the same page about what any of these things mean or how any of these things work. And
Mhm.
so we really, by being out there early on a large loss, we're really able to help kind of corral some of that activity. We help notice, like, okay, so you're doing a Matterport, which means we're not, but can we get access to that Matterport, much more quickly? Otherwise, we're going to have to pull our own. There's been plenty of times where we've already been out there, and say Young and Associates, turns up on the job. They'll have us do the Matterport instead of doing it themselves. We'll actually, you know, we'll try to create the work product that even they use so that
Mhm.
everyone's working off of the same things. And then at least your argument is apples to apples.
Yeah.
And, it's not, well, you have 160,000 square feet and we have 220.
Yeah.
It can be, what are you charging for a desiccant per day, or are you capping equipment? Those
Right.
kinds of arguments.
Right. Yeah, it's nice to be arguing about at least the same topic.
Yeah.
Starting on the same page.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and the thing that's super interesting to me too is when I was a restoration contractor and I would document a loss, there would always be somebody who wanted to try to pick apart what I was producing, or
Mhm.
my professional opinion. The second that I put this shirt on and stepped into this role, not to say nobody's ever questioned it, but it's exceedingly rare,
Mhm.
which is I'm happy for, but it's also super annoying. Like, the knowledge base didn't change.
Yeah, yeah.
The accuracy of the opinion didn't change.
Yeah.
I just changed where I was standing slightly.
Yeah.
And now all of a sudden I'm a subject matter expert. And, it's better than the alternative, but it always amuses me sometimes. And you'll see consultants that'll walk into a project and immediately they're like, well, where's your moisture maps? Not realizing that there's a third party moisture mapping company on site. And then I go, here's your moisture maps. And then the fire just goes out of them very quickly. The
Mhm.
argument about the actual scope of the project that just kind of dies, and then everyone just moves on to the next thing, whether we're tearing out Gypcrete or not,
Mhm.
not how many rooms were affected. I think it's 20, you say it's 30.
Yeah, completely. So what's the smallest loss that would be beneficial to have your company on? Because I love to know that you're out there and doing good work, and it sounds like this is a really an easy way to get rid of some of the friction that would likely be there. So it sounds like hiring you guys, having you assist is kind of a no-brainer, as long as
Yeah,
the lot size,
we
allows
typically
for it.
we typically see it as a no-brainer. The area that restoration contractors get caught on it is they're used to billing out 45, $55 an hour for moisture mapping, whatever the exact
Mhm,
rate for a technician is in their
mhm,
market. On large losses, that's not typically how it works. For instance, if the carrier calls out EFI Global, they're paying $185 an hour for at least an average level person.
mhm,
And the carriers are initiating these calls and paying these amounts.
mhm.
As soon as you make it third party, we do not get treated the same as a restoration contractor. And
Yeah,
some of these restoration contractors, like, yes, we're a version of you. All my guys are IICRC certified, OSHA trained, all the stuff. They have worked on a lot of restoration projects. But when the carrier looks at us, that's typically not the position we're taking. We
mhm,
are an environmental consultant at that point. Uh, you know, PAs seem to pick up on it more easily because they would rather have the data and they'll know that they can get it paid. So
yeah,
PAs will hire us very quickly,
mhm,
and we'll never have a problem getting paid our portion on those. You
mhm,
know, if it's a contractor, it can be hit or miss. They'll be
mhm,
like, well, I can, your rate is $75 for a tech and I'm only getting 55. So I'm going to lose money. When in
mhm,
reality, if you submitted third party moisture maps and that third party invoice, the carrier's going to pay it unless they really think something went wrong,
mhm,
or they had initially declined having any, if they straight up told you like, hey, we're only going to pay this much. We had
mhm.
that on a job in Cleveland. They said we're only paying 20,000, and so then we went back to the contractor and we're like, well, here's the work product we can produce for that. It's not going to
Yeah,
be to the degree we typically like, but hey, they got paid, we got paid, everyone went home happy. The loss was documented. But typically, if a PA is involved, we never have an issue getting paid. There's never been a single cent negotiated off of a invoice on a project with a PA. Typically, it's the restoration contractors that tend to get pushed around a little bit more.
mhm,
But we do moisture mapping on residential properties within our home markets.
mhm,
I've actually been called out to verify things that restoration contractors have done, including one that I knew personally, and the project was not going the way that it should have.
mhm.
So we actually basically stood in kind of as her rep in trying to get all the other parties on the claim to do what they were supposed to get everything back on track.
Yeah,
There was plaster that they said was dry that was absolutely not dry. It was a 3-story residential loss. There was a lot going on with it. But I mean, we do things all the way down to our office in Arkansas does like real estate transaction type stuff. So they'll have, oh, this door was installed incorrectly and there's a leak over here. The smaller things, it tends to be something that you really need a third party for. So something that may have a lawsuit associated with
yeah.
it. Um,
Something's already gone wrong.
yeah, so something's typically happening there. What we see a lot is if a contractor takes over a loss from another contractor, whether they're restoration or not, uh, a lot of times they'll call us out so that it's a third party dictating how much is still wet or how much was wet to begin with, rather than their own opinion, since obviously they have an interest on making the other company look bad or something of that nature. So having the third party report levels the playing field for everyone. But we work all the way down to, we'll work in like 5 or 10,000 square foot commercial settings, especially like if it's medical things like that. The higher the
Mhm,
risk, the easier it is to justify the larger invoices.
mhm,
The Typically our services are around 50 cents a square foot on your just average run of the mill large loss. But the smaller the project is, the harder it becomes to compensate for the travel time and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
A larger portion of that invoice is mobilization and demobilization.
Yeah.
And so, we've done projects for like $1 a square foot, but it typically requires a situation where that third party is more necessary than your average hotel water loss, for instance.
Yeah.
Someone's going to get sued, someone is being sued, it's a medical facility, things like that.
Yeah. Well, it's fantastic. I'm so glad to know that you guys are out there and doing a good job. And
Thank you.
I wish you were in Portland. So that you could
We actually have
help out my
one
home
of our
market.
markets that we're starting is actually Boise, which long
Okay.
ways from Portland, but
Yeah.
we're getting that direction.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic. Thank you so much
Thank
for
you.
your time. And I look forward to running into you at industry events down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, we're usually at least a couple of them as long as the storms hold off. So
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks, Luke. We'll talk
no
to you
problem.
soon.
Thank you.